All right. This is a particular pleasure to welcome Lucie Laplane. Lucie is a friend, but in addition to being a friend, she is one of my favorite philosophers in the world. She is a very, very impressive scholar, as you know already. I don't remember exactly when we met. I remember it was a long time ago. And what I remember very well is that talking to this young woman was a shock. She was already amazing when she was a master's student. So it was really a pleasure for me to discover her work and to collaborate with her. Her PhD dissertation, which was, as I said, very, very impressive for the PhD committee and for everyone around her. The PhD became a book, and the book was a shock to the people who had not had the chance to meet Lucie during her PhD. So the book is on cancer stem cells. The subtitle is Philosophy and Therapies. Since then, Lucie has been interested in many different topics, though cancer remains most of the time the focus. So she has worked, for example, recently on clonal evolution with a particular focus on cancer. She's been very interested in the dialogue between evolution and cancer, for example. She's a researcher at CNRS. I forgot to mention that. She received an important medal, the bronze medal at CNRS, which is a recognition for her work. She has constantly tried to push the limits or to think about the limits between philosophy and science, and this is going to be the main topic for today's discussion. Currently, she works on four main projects. There are more, in fact, but those four are quite central at the moment in Lucie's work. One is about lineages, another is about clonal evolution and cancer. The third is about how does cancer kill? And the fourth is about philosophy of cancer biology. Do cancer treatments induce cancer cell decanalization, which is also a collaborative project? Lucie has written a lot of very interesting papers in addition to the book that I mentioned before. Again, very impressive list of publications with a lot of diversity, and I know that many of you know already her work. Today, she agreed to talk about the obsession of many of us, the good obsession of many of us, which is how exactly and how far exactly we should go when we want to integrate philosophy and biology, when we do philosophy of biology and or philosophy in biology. So Lucie, I think you're one of the very few who will have given twice a talk in this seminar series. So thank you for accepting this second invitation to this seminar. And the virtual floor is yours, Lucie.
Thanks a lot. Now I'm very intimidated both by the crowd and the introduction. I'm afraid I'm not going to be up to the standard you described, but I hope we have a good conversation. So let me share my screen. Does that work?
Perfect.
Yes.
I'm just okay. So the question I will ask today is how much should philosophers in biology engage with biology? Before I do that, I just want to give a little bit of context. So I'm a philosopher. I'm part of the IHPST team of philosophy in Paris. But my daily work, I do it in Gustave Roussy, which is a cancer center in the south of Paris, and in close collaboration with another lab in Institut Curie. And with this setup, I often go to the bench and do some experiments. And lately, I've also started to analyze RNA-seq data as part of my philosophical activity. And because I consider that it's part of my way of doing philosophy, I've given a little name to it. I call it the Philabo, and I try to work out how to improve this form of practice. And the talk is related to this mixed activity. So the driving question for the talk is what place for biology in specifically philosophy in biology. And I want to start by a debate, a collective debate with you. But in order to have this debate productive, I'm going to do a little bit of setup. So first thing I want to remind what philosophy in science is, and for that I'm going to just use the work by Thomas Mael and their colleagues. So philosophy in science is part of philosophy of science. So we have to consider that there are two ways to do philosophy of science. One could be called philosophy on science. So philosophy and science would act independently. And the other would be philosophy in science. And philosophy in science is connected to science by two ways. So philosophy in science starts with a scientific problem, so a problem that is identified in the scientific community. It treats this problem through philosophical means, but with a very specific aim, which is to produce a scientific proposal. Oui. So then we can ask what is a scientific contribution, and I'm not going to discuss this extensively. I will also use the description proposed by Thomas and collaborators and consider that a scientific contribution is a scientific significant proposal that is published in science, published or presented.
Christine,
So,
hello.
hi.
Sorry, Lucie, I will mute everyone.
So, a scientific contribution is a scientific significant proposal published in a science journal or presented in a scientific conference and cited or visible in science, for example, cited or discussed by scientists. So really, philosophy of science, to me at least, is really it's philosophy. It's philosophy of science with a specific goal. So for me, the main specificity of PINS is its goal, namely the aim of addressing scientific problems and making scientific contributions. And this raises a question. And the question for me is whether the specificity of this goal requires also specific means. Given that philosophy in science requires a tight connection between philosophy and science, one could think that there might be a relationship between the amount of biological knowledge we have and the quality of the philosophy in biology that we can produce. And this is the question I want to ask. I want to ask how our biological knowledge impact the quality of our production in the context of philosophy in biology. So I'm going to set up this in as a two-dimension diagram. Let's discuss a little bit about the two axes. For the biological knowledge, I think of it as both qualitative and quantitative. So the qualitative question is what kind of knowledge do we need to do good philosophy in biology? And the quantitative question is how much of this knowledge do we need? And then the other axis would quantify the quality of the philosophy in biology production. And this again can be both qualitative and quantitative. And I don't want to discuss too much this. I will take for granted that we accept the description provided by Thomas and colleagues. So qualitative would be the fact that it is a scientific contribution. And for quantitative aspect, I suggest that to me it seems that there are two main aspects. One is how relevant is the scientific proposal that we produce, and how well does it percolate inside science. So now the question is, what is this relationship? And I envision that the quality of the production in philosophy in biology as a function of biological knowledge. So one possibility would be that there is a linear correlation. So the more you know about biology, the better will be your philosophy in biology. But you could also imagine that there is a plateau. So you need to know a certain amount about biology, and after that, more is not really needed and is not going to make a difference on your ability to do good philosophy in biology. You could also imagine that there is a risk and that too much could become deleterious to the quality of your work. And so, for example, it's in philosophy of science more generally, you can see arguments in manuals that would state the risks. So here I'm providing an example from a book from Samir Okasha, where he says that also the interaction between philosopher and scientist are beneficial. There needs to be a certain distance between the two. And he says this allows scientists to focus on their day job, and it allows philosophers the freedom to apply the tools of their trade to the conceptual issue that they find in science. But not everybody agrees on those risks. So, for example, here I translated a quote from Jean Gaillon, where he said, "Philosophers must not be swayed by the myth of the philosophical striptease, by which I mean the gradual stripping away of philosophy. It is rather the risk of overload that we should fear, and perhaps also that of fragmentation." So Gaillon disagrees that there is a risk on the quality of the philosophical work. Rather, he sees an indirect risk, which is more related to how much we can do as individuals. If there is a benefit risk balance, then the question becomes, where exactly is the peak on the biological knowledge axis? So you could imagine a case where the benefits are very quick. So you learn a little bit about biology, and your philosophy in biology is going to be much better, but the risks are going to kick in very quickly. Or you could imagine that the amount of knowledge you need to do good philosophy in biology is enormous, and the risks are so far away that they are possibly will never know enough to be in the risks part of the curve. And the last possibility would be that, in fact, how much you know about biology makes very little difference on the quality of your activity. So, with this setup in mind, I want to open a debate about this relationship, and I want to uh, to put some rules for the debate. Otherwise, it can be very messy, and maybe we can debate for a full day. So the first rule of the debate is you cannot answer "it depends." Of course, it depends. So if you want to say it depends, you can, but then in this case, tell me it depends on what. So tell me, for example, if my goal is X, then the appropriate diagram would be B for this or that reasons. So this is the first thing. I'm really interested in discussing the relationship between the quality of beings and the biological knowledge. The other rule is I don't want the debate to focus on what do we mean by a good philosophy in biology. This is a very important question. I acknowledge this, but we can't have both debate going on. So I really want to focus rather on how much biological knowledge is needed to do good philosophy in biology. So now we can open the debate
You
on.
see, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but Jonathan had a question in the chat about, are you talking about the individual knowledge or the collective knowledge? And I'm pretty sure you're talking about the knowledge of one individual doing for, but this is just maybe useful to clarify this before people say what they think.
Yes, I was thinking about for each individual, what does it take to do good philosophy in biology?
So we vote in the chat.
Yeah, we can vote, or people can express their mind if they have a.
Um, Perhaps I could make a comment if that would be okay.
Yeah.
So Lucy, I'm sorry for arriving a little bit late. I missed the opening slides, but this is an interesting question. I'm not a philosopher, I'm a mathematician, but I suspect the experiences of mathematicians coming to biology and philosophers coming to biology may have some overlap. I would just make a comment which maybe precedes your analysis here, that I think for me, the question of biological knowledge is a little complicated. And to simplify or caricature it, I would say that I think there are at least two kinds of knowledge that one may encounter, which one might call public knowledge, which is the knowledge that you read in textbooks and papers. It's a sort of outward-facing part of biology. And then there's what I would call private knowledge, which is actually the knowledge that is discussed within individual research groups in biology. Because biology, I think, has a distinctive sociological organization that it has this distinction between private and public, which I think from outside biology is not always so visible. And this distinction is quite marked because a lot of what is known in private does not appear in public. And I would say that from my own experience, what is most interesting and most essential to really get to grips is the private knowledge. So I wonder if that is something that plays into the conversation you want to have here, or maybe that is a little bit of, what do you mean by knowledge? And it's opening the discussion too far. But I feel for me that has been a very important issue.
Yes, I agree with that. And for me, this is part of the qualitative question, like what kind of knowledge do we need, and can we just use knowledge that we gain from reading, or do we need also knowledge that we gain from being in the lab? So this is totally part of the question for me. And later in the talk, I will argue that knowledge gained in the lab is making a difference. Yeah. Sonia?
Thanks, and thanks for raising this very interesting question. I just wanted to say, make an observation. I'm not going to take a strong position. I want to make an observation, which is that, which I'm sure you're very aware of, when you're in a lab and you're working on a particular question in a particular experimental system, which means a particular organism, taking a particular approach to observing or experimenting with that organism, that's a very local kind of knowledge. So in addition to this point about private and public versions of knowledge or aspects of knowledge, that specificity, I think, is it's very much where individual insight is located, but it also limits how one thinks and what one's biological awareness is. And so I just wanted to add that because I'm so intrigued to see biological knowledge as something that can be a linear additive quantity in all of these plots. So that's all I'll say.
Fair points. I think Scott has his hand. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I had a very similar observation to that of Sonia's, and that's I think that biology, philosophical knowledge might be more like punctuated equilibrium, that there's spurts and starts and stuff. And I was thinking as a test case, you have this incredible uh, debut of anti-reductionism led by a group of feminist biologists, thinking, Donna Haraway, Anne Fausto Sterling, Ruth Hubbard, Bonnie Spanier, Eva Jablonka. You have this really all of a sudden this philosophical no, the epistemology is wrong thing coming, 1970s, 1980s. And so I'm wondering if that would be a test case for this type of knowledge production, and when the private becomes public, when the political becomes the philosophical, if you will.
Yeah, but I'm not too sure how we would evaluate, because for me now the question is really how to do good philosophy in biology. What does it take? How much knowledge it takes? And in this case, I'm not sure to see how this would help answer this question.
Well, I think it's more rearranging the knowledge than having the knowledge. It's more seeing different configurations of knowledge that already exists, of the data points, putting the stars into new constellations rather than discovering the new stars themselves, maybe. But
Yeah.
it allows you to say, hey, there should be a star here.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. Yeah. So you would say little knowledge is sufficient to do already good work.
A little new knowledge. Yeah, you could put it using the philosophy, you could put the old knowledge into new uses, I think, or new frameworks.
Thanks. I think Scott and Fridolin. Thomas, do you see the hands and things?
Yeah, I think Scott was just asking his question. We're good. And then I think we have Fridolin.
Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, so this is just maybe a question on, Jean Gaillon's position about this. You presented it as mainly a kind of practical obstacle of overload, but what did he exactly mean by fragmentation? And isn't fragmentation also a risk that you basically recreate the kind of specialization that scientists engage in, and that might also diminish the quality of your philosophical work?
So what he meant is maybe it's a mistranslation from my part. He meant the French word was dispersion. So the risk is that you work on too many different things and then you do nothing well. So it's this, to me, it's a similar risk from overload. It's like you have too much to do and then you can't do it properly.
Okay, that
It's
makes sense.
like lack of time. Scott?
Nope. Oh, other Scott.
The other Scott, I think it was. You are muted.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Following partly on what the other Scott was saying, but also on a comment that Paul Griffiths made. That is, I'm coming to philosophy of biology and also history of biology as a scientist. So the opposite direction. And my experience has been that being biologically informed does have a more or less linear relationship in context, that is, within the domain in which a scientist is working, the nuances of debates in a particular field are best informed if both collaborators are aware of them and can keep up with those debates sufficiently in their collaboration. So, to the extent that the quality of the philosophy and biology product is improved, I would go with A or something like it, not seeing a downstream terrible risk of too much knowledge on the part of a philosopher. That's been my experience in co-editing a volume with historians and philosophers and biologists, and also in my own collaboration with both of those groups.
Thanks a lot. Now we have one vote for one of the diagrams. Thanks. And I don't see the chat, Thomas, just to let
Oh,
you
you don't see the chat because you
know.
would not have said that. We have quite many votes in the chat. It will be recorded anyway, Lucie. So either you want to have a look at it now, or if you prefer, it will be anyway available later. We
Okay.
have quite many votes for E, a version of B. No, there is diversity here.
Okay, cool.
Uh, and and Jonathan Weitzman was asking a question to those who vote for E, but maybe that's really getting too much into the details if we start talking about, who says what and for which reasons. But yeah, and many scientists seem to be, so Soren at the moment, and many others before seem to be more for a version of A.
Okay.
Tom, can I ask my question anyway?
You can, Jonathan. You're free. Please do.
I was just intrigued. What would be the determinant of the sudden drop in E? What would suddenly make knowledge too much knowledge? I just wanted to hear what Lucie thought about that.
So I would say, for example, Jean Gaillon risk would be of that kind. So it's always beneficial until you don't have enough time to work anymore, because you put too much time on learning the biology or doing.
Because it's not too much knowledge; it's too much time spent on knowledge.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
That would be my version of E, at least.
I thought it was maybe knowing too much biology actually somehow restricts your intellectual creativity.
Yeah, well, maybe some people could make the argument, but what I had in mind was something of the kind of risk that was described by Jean Gaillon. Good question.
Tim raised his hand.
Yeah, hello. So
Hello.
my question would be, I don't know whether this violates the rules you put, but like my question would be how much, like the vice versa point. So how much should biologists know about philosophy to actually create relative knowledge on which then philosophers of biology could refer to actually do their work. So I think there's a like kind of vice versa interaction, not just like how much should philosophers know about biology, but like at first this knowledge should be relevant, and for that I think that also biologists should be quite aware of philosophical points in order to create relevant knowledge. So that's like
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm going to focus the talk on the question of how to do good philosophy in biology, but I agree that the reverse question is as relevant. Thanks. Well, now
Lucy,
there's a lot of
there's a
questions.
practical question here.
Yeah,
We have three hands, and either you want to take those questions or comments, or you want to suggest that we keep them for the Q&As. This is really your decision.
yeah. Let me check the time. I think maybe we should move on and we can go back to the discussion. I plan to leave time at the end so that we can keep going with this discussion, if that's
Okay.
okay with everybody. So let me go back to this. So with this debate, I wanted to put you in a space where you see that there is no agreement on this relationship, and I think it's a fundamental question for us, both as researcher, because we have to ask ourselves the question: how can we do the best possible work, right? So for me, it's very important to know if it is diagram A, then I should put as much effort as I can in increasing my knowledge of biology. Whereas if it is something like C, then maybe I should be careful in how much I learn. And if it is something like F, then it's just for fun and I do whatever I want, right? So individually it's important, but it's also important collectively. And given that philosophy in biology is kind of an emerging field, also it was there for long, we can see that there is interest growing in the field. And then we have to ask how do we ensure collectively that individuals can perform the best possible philosophy in biology. So this means what kind of position do we need for young researcher? What do we need to value in their curricula? How should the funding be evaluated and provided? Where should people publish? All these kind of question, practical question, are going to be important if we want philosophy in biology as a general way of doing philosophy of biology to thrive in the future. So I really think this is a question that needs to be clarified, and we are not spending enough time on this. We are not really asking this question so frontally, and I hope there will be more question on thinking about this relationship. In the rest of the talk, I'm going to ask to turn to a more specific question and maybe a more personal question, which relate to what kind of biological knowledge we need to do good pins. And this is based on the idea that my assumption is that the diagram probably look like this. So there is a linear relationship between biological knowledge and quality of the production until time is lacking, and then we can't do anything good because we just don't have time for it. And so this is an assumption. I don't know if it is true, and kind of I consider that I'm trying to push the boundaries on daily basis. I'm trying like to see if I can reach the peak or if I fall, and we'll see. History will tell. But I'm going to start with a little digression. I've always been struck by this idea that I keep seeing and hearing, which is that philosophy of biology and biology would lie on a continuum, going from the theoretical activity to the empirical activity, and it would be just the difference between the two disciplines would really just be a quantitative matter rather than a qualitative matter. So philosopher would do more of the theoretical activity and biologist more of the empirical activity. It's weird to me. I think theoretical activity and empirical activity are really two very different things. That's the first thing. And the second thing is we could say, yeah, there is a continuum, a quantitative continuum, if each discipline was doing both, but in quantitative different amounts. So biologists do theoretical activity. Somehow we could say biologists have to do some philosophy, but they do mostly empirical work. Conversely, philosophers, they typically do only the theoretical part and they don't do at all empirical work. There are a few exceptions, but typically philosophers don't do any empirical work, and it's not considered that empirical activity is part of philosophical activity. So one question I have, because I'm bothered by this continuum thing, is it possible that actually if we would make it a true continuum, where philosopher would also do a little bit of empirical work, this would help us climb that peak. So of course it would be quantitative. The idea would be philosopher would do a little bit of empirical work and a lot of theoretical work. And the question is, would that improve the quality of philosophy in biology specifically? So there are a few, mostly historians and a few philosophers who have or who are doing experimental work. Actually, there are more historians than philosophers who have or are doing experimental work. And in particular, there is a trend that is called practical history, which consists in redoing experiments from the past. This is a thing, like various historians have done that. Then there is the case of Hazard Cheng, who is a historian and philosopher of science, who does experimental work. He has made several types of experimental work. So part of this is practical history, and he has distinguished two kinds of practical history. One would be replicating exactly experiments from the past as they were. He calls that historical replication. One is replicating the experiments, but not necessarily exactly in the same way. The idea is if you want to understand the experiment in itself, doesn't matter the way you do it. This is physical replication. And one part is simply throughout this activity and historical replication and historical investigation, you may face the need to do new experiments, and he calls that extension. He's a unique case of historian and philosopher of science who has done recurrent experimental work and theorized a lot about it. And in philosophy, there is at least one striking example that I want to mention, and maybe others, but Anne-Sophie Barwich has launched a lab which mix philosophy and experimentation. I love the title of the lab, the think tank. So there are cases. What I want to say is that there are cases outside of philosophers or historians of science who do experiment, and they each see benefit in doing that. So here I'm going to just recapitulate very quickly the argument that people have made in favor of doing this kind of experimental work. The first argument is that it allows to produce new scientific knowledge. This in particular has been argued by Hazeb Cheng. He, for example, has, through his extension experimental work, discovered a way to do drinkable gold. So it's just that the main idea is historian, in his case, historian who do experiment for their own historical purpose, and through this they may end up producing actual scientific knowledge, like how to produce drinkable gold. A second argument is that it is a unique source of knowledge. I think this is a very important argument. Here I'm taking the example of Edwin Clark. He was a neurobiologist who became an historian and who did a lot of practical history. And he was working on Malpighi and the question of whether he was the first to identify cells in animals. The text and the figures were not clear on that. So to clarify this question, he did practical history. He went back to using the same microscope to look at the data. And he could observe that for sure what he was describing as something that could look like cells were not actually cells. But to be able to answer this question, he really had to look at the microscope and see what Malpighi was looking at. And so here the argument is knowledge is not all in the written sources. So in philosophy in general, most of the activity is really based on written sources, sometimes oral sources, but the experimental sources is also really just an independent source from which you will gain a knowledge that you just can't gain by any other mean. I think this argument is really important because it means if you don't do the experiment, there is just a part of knowledge you won't have. Then a third argument has been that it allows the production of new questions and then of their producing their answer. One example comes from Jane Mayenschein in her PhD. So Jane is a historian of biology. In her PhD, I think it was, she was working on epigenesis and preformation, and she was interested in how Harrison experiments settled the debate between the two. But she failed to replicate the experiment, although she asked the help from very good specialists. So the fact that even the specialists could not help her replicate the experiment raised the question, how did Harrison actually succeed? And by raising this new question, she started a new historical project on the archive, and this led to new discovery about Harrison work, and new question and new answer that would not have existed without her doing the experimental work. The fourth argument is that doing experiments just give a better understanding of how science works. This is a claim that I've seen again and again by everybody who has done experimental work. It's a kind of sobering. So here I'm giving a quote from Mayenschein and colleagues saying, practical history always teaches a lot about science. We learn that science is difficult, that it involves choices and techniques and practice that remain largely unarticulated and sometimes black boxed, as sociologists like to put it. That tells us much about how science works. So those are 4 arguments that you can see in the literature from people who have done experimental work in the context of history and or philosophy of science. Now, I want to add 2 more arguments. One is related to the fact that specifically for philosophy of science, philosophy in science, sorry, given that the aim is to find relevant questions that we can address philosophically in a scientifically relevant way. One major issue is to actually find the right question. And for me, this has been key. So when I did my PhD, it was on the question of what is a stem cell. When I started the project, to me, it looked like a perfect philosophical question. That would be a definition question about what are the properties to define stem cell. Nobody agreed. So there was a lot to do with the definition. But then when I went to the lab, I realized I really just don't care about the definition. It wasn't a priority. There was something much more important to address, which was what it is for a cell to be a stem cell. How does it work? And this led me to an ontological question. So I explored both in the PhD, but the ontological question was actually the one that became central to the work. Very quickly, I showed that stemness could be 4 different types of property, and this was very important for science because it had practical consequences, especially in the context of cancer, because it would lead to different treatments being either efficient or failing to cure cancer. So here, going to the lab, to the bench, really helped me see what was the question on which I could do relevant philosophical work. And then the other goal of PINS is really to produce a scientific proposal that is interesting for science, and so really one issue is you don't just want to do good philosophical work, you want your good philosophical work to actually percolate efficiently in science. And this is really difficult. And partly it's difficult again because of this issue of continuum. So although everybody thinks there is a continuum, my own experience is there is a huge, massive gap between theoretical activity and empirical activity because what we do as philosophers usually is work as a quite high level of abstraction and ask big questions. This is what we have to offer, actually. That's really something positive. But the empirical work instead is always very local. The type of question you can answer through an experiment are always restricted small question. And so this creates a huge gap. And for me, bridging this gap is going through a very, very tiny line. And I think most of the goodness of philosophy just fall down during in this gap. So one very important question for us is how can we ensure that the quality of the work we do at this high level of abstraction can really percolate into local and small questions that scientists would typically work with. And for me, this issue of this very fine line is one that pushed me to always think about how I can connect the two activities, the theoretical part and the empirical part. So for every philosophical project I have, I always try to have experimental project that goes with it. So I try to go from the big question, highly abstract level to the empirical work. So I'm giving a very short, small example. For the stem cells, I have described these four possible ontology for stemness. For this, I'm trying to test whether whether this classification is more to be considered as ontological. So that would mean, in fact, we call stem cells objects that are very different, or whether it is epistemic, so it's just different way of describing the same thing. And for this, I'm trying to test experimentally the evolutionary history of stem cells. So we look at stem cells from different type of stem cells from different species to try to evaluate to understand the evolutionary history of stem cells, trying to understand whether all stem cells have a unique common origin or whether stem cells appears independently several times throughout evolution. And then we try to, so this is a bioinformatic analysis, and then we try to validate experimentally the result we find from the bioinformatic analysis. So my first conclusion is that doing experimental work produce benefits. The benefits are it can produce knowledge, it's a unique source of knowledge, it can produce new questions and their answer, it can help us better understand how science works, it can help us find relevant questions, and it can also help us improve the percolation of philosophy in biology and medicine. Now, the question is, are really all those benefits helping us climb this peak and improve the quality of philosophy in biology production? I think maybe not all of these arguments are improving the quality. So, for example, knowledge production and production of new questions, it's not improving the quality of the production, it's just improving the landscape of the type of production that we can do as philosophers in biology. However, the other four arguments, so the fact that it is a unique source of knowledge, that it helps better understand how science works, that it helps us find relevant questions, and that it can improve percolation, those, I think, are arguments that really can help us increase the quality of philosophy in biology. So this leads me to the conclusion that experimental work can be useful in philosophy and biology, but I think that a stronger claim could be made, and for this I'm going to use Hazog Cheng. So Hazog says in his case that experimental work, he described it as complementary to the scientific work, because typically he said the kind of work that historian and philosopher of science are going to do is going to be different from the work that scientists are doing typically. And so he argues that the knowledge produced by these experiments are non-orthodox. And so it means if you remove experimental work from history and philosophy of science, then you have an incomplete science, because this production is never going to be made by scientists themselves. And you also have a mutilated history and philosophy of science, because we could do this work and nobody is going to do it for us, and we aren't. So this means actually it's not just that experimental work can be useful to philosophy in biology, but rather that it is needed. So maybe if I want to make a strong claim, I would say this is a good philosopher in biology, and this is an even better philosopher in biology. However, so now I want to talk a little bit about the risks. So I made the argument that doing experimental work can help increase the quality, but can it also represent risk in our productivity and production. So the limitation and risk I see is that experimental work is really time consuming. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it's difficult, so it requires expertise. And of course, if we do only a little bit of experimental work, we will never have the expertise, which means the experiments we are going to do are going to lack the efficacy and maybe the quality that scientists have. And the last point is that it's really boring, like very, very boring to have to repeat the same experiment several times. So that's, to me, has been a limitation too. So because of this limitation, I think we should ask the question, do we really need to do the experimental work ourselves? And I think on this question, several answers are possible. And so, favorite philosopher answer, it depends. But I'm going to be a little bit more precise. I think, for example, for the case of knowledge production, not only would I say that collaboration can work, but I would actually claim if your goal is to produce knowledge at the end, scientific knowledge at the end through the experimental work, then you need to have the expertise, and so this should be done in collaboration. However, if what you want is to have access to this unique source of knowledge, then I would say no pain, no gain. You have to do the experimental work. For production of new questions, both can work. For better understanding of how science works, there is no other way than doing it. Same for the fact that it will help you find a relevant question. And for improving the percolation, I would argue both would work. So I'm going to conclude now. The question of the place that we should allocate to biology in philosophy, in biology especially, but that's also true for philosophy of biology, is to me a very important question, a question that we should ask both for ourselves, but also collectively for the development of the field. And it's a tricky question. I think it's really far from trivial. And the last point I want to make is I think I've tried to show that experimental work can be a way to improve the knowledge of biology and the quality of philosophy in biology. And so this push toward the idea that maybe we need to revise a little bit what we think philosophy in biology is, like what it entails as part of our activity. And I would argue toward a more inclusive view of philosophy in science. And an interesting consequence of that is that if we are more inclusive in philosophy in science, then as a consequence, philosophy of science will also be more inclusive, because philosophy in science is just a part of philosophy of science. And I'm using this illustration of an artist. I was visiting this museum and I was looking at this art, and there were people around saying, this is not art. And I often have the same feedback about my experimental work. People would say it's not philosophy. And I think really art is what artists are doing, and similarly, philosophy in biology is going to be what philosophers in biology are doing. So it's our responsibility to define what the discipline should be. So I want to thank my team because, of course, this way of doing philosophy can only be done if I have a good group of scientists around me. So for that, I'm very thankful to Solari and Porte's team and to Perrier's team, as well as Vervoort and Gazav team, my group of students. And I also want more specifically to thank Kate, Jane, Thomas, and Maël for very fruitful discussion about what PINS is. And I'll stop there. So now we have time for discussion.
Thank you very much, Lucie. That was great, and I'm sure we'll have many questions. My request for everyone would be to keep your questions or comments relatively short if possible, because I know there will be many. Also, some people wanted to ask questions during the initial discussion, so do not hesitate to raise your hand again to make your point or ask your question. George, you're first.
Well, thank you very much. First, thank you, Lucie, for this beautiful talk. Very deep and very interesting because it's personal experience. My question is, would you think there is a difference of practice or difference of approach between the people who start as biologists and then go to philosophy, or people like you who start in philosophy and then go to the labs? Is there a difference, according to you, in projects?
This is a very interesting question. I really don't know. Also because I think it kind of depends on what drives the biologist to go from biology to philosophy. So I see two kind of biologists. The ones that have been disappointed by biology and turned to philosophy, those are often leaving aside their biological knowledge and not really using it in their philosophical work. And then the second trend is biologists who turn to philosophy and do more philosophy in biology kind of work. For this second type of scientist, I would say probably the difference depends on who you compare it with, who you compare them. So it's an interesting question because if we would be able to do an actual study, it would be interesting to see biologists. Probably they know more than philosophers about biology. So does it make an impact in the quality of their philosophy? That would be an interesting question. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Thank you very much.
Alessia, you're next.
Thank you very much for your talk. So my question kind of goes back to the how much knowledge issue. So I'm wondering if you see any room for an agnotological approach whereby certain types of ignorance or knowledge gaps on the part of philosophers of science may be epistemically productive. I mean, this is not kind of easily quantifiable or represented on a linear plot, but there is some work along these lines in science and technology studies on the kind of the fruitfulness of certain epistemic gaps in scientific interdisciplinary scientific collaborations. So I wonder what your take on that would be.
Yeah, so that's an argument that is often made that being far away from the science is actually part of the benefits in the context of interdisciplinarity. And I agree, it's true. Like people have made this experience again and again. However, if you think about the quality of the philosophy in biology production, then it's a very poor argument because mostly the argument of being far away from biology is like you would take any scholar and it would have the same impact. So it means the fact that we are philosophers play very little role in this specific argument, like in the gain from ignorance is not really a gain from philosophy. It doesn't come from the fact that we are philosophers. It comes from the fact that we are ignorant. So it's interesting for science. It's not very interesting for philosophy in biology itself. So I would leave ignorance to philosopher of science.
I think Parvati or Mauricio or whoever is with Parvati is the next in line.
Hello, thank you for, sorry. Thank you for the talk. My question is related to if you consider the unit of production of pins to be an individual or a group, because in many cases you see how pins projects are relatively consisted of a group that then this kind of knowledge experience or knowledge acquisition would be related more to a project than to an individual skill set. So like, what's the individual set or like unit of production of pins in your case? Mm-hmm.
So this is a good question. Very often you hear people say about interdisciplinarity that the main problem is that we don't speak the same language. Part of it is really we speak different language. Part of it is we don't know the language of the other. And so this means it's a problem that you actually don't know what your interlocutor know. So I would say individual knowledge is actually making a huge difference in how efficiently interdisciplinary group work. So interdisciplinary groups of people who have very separated knowledge, they just don't work very efficiently. While big knowledge overlap, this is where interdisciplinary group work the best, at least in my experience.
The next question is by a great philosopher of chemistry. Eric, you're next in line.
Thank you for that introduction, Thomas. And thank you very much for this excellent lecture. As Thomas just mentioned, I'm a philosopher of chemistry, and I've been very interested in hearing about this because philosophy of chemistry is a relative newcomer in the field of philosophy of science. We only really began in the mid-1990s. And frankly, there's been a lack of cross-fertilization between chemists and philosophers, which is maybe because we're still trying to develop the field. In any case, let me ask a question. I don't know if you've seen a recent paper in Studies in History and Philosophy of Science by Catherine Pleasance, who the title is something like An Empirical Investigation of Scientists and Engineers' Views about the Engagement with Philosophy of Science. The authors make the case that whereas a lot of very famous scientists have said that philosophy contributes nothing to science, the people that they have surveyed, the sort of rank and file scientists, have a different view. They have a much more positive view about philosophy. I wonder if you could just comment why I'm mystified by this conclusion that whereas famous scientists like Richard Dawkins, Hawking, and I forget the big names.
Weinberg, for example,
Weinberg, etc. Right? And yet they conclude that regular scientists, people they've surveyed, have a much more positive view. I just wondered if you or somebody else here might have a comment on that. I am completely mystified by why that should be the case.
Really, I don't know if someone has a clear idea. I can say something about it, but I really have no clue. Um,
But is that something, Lucy, you've seen in your own experience that in fact scientists you worked with were pretty enthusiastic about philosophy, or it's not your experience? Maybe this is one
Oh,
thing you can address.
well,
it's not my experience. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
I think, well, my experience is that biologist is a mixed bag of some people who are very enthusiastic about philosophy, uh, even though they have no clue what it is. They are pretty enthusiastic about it. Some are dubious about it, even though they have no idea what it is. They think it's just like intellectual masturbation or something like that. And a lot are indecisive, so they are waiting for us to show what it is to decide whether it's beneficial or not, and interesting or not. And in the light of what we propose, well, the reaction can vary depending on how performant we are. Yeah.
Eric, do you want a quick follow-up on that, or we can move to the next question?
Well, just a quick follow-up. Thank you for your response. If anyone else has views on this, please write to me. Please send me an email. I'm becoming more and more fascinated with this question. Thank you.
Fridolin, sorry.
Yeah, I was just curious to know whether, I mean, you think that this question that you raise can be addressed empirically. So if more biological knowledge produces better philosophy,
I love
and
this
if so,
question.
how?
I love this question. This is a very interesting question, and I'm bothered by this question. So at the individual, it's very difficult. At the individual scale, you can't do it. Like, I thought about it. Can I do the same work with and without the experimental work and compare what is best? But I can't individually. So then you would say maybe we can compare collectively. But the field is so small and the quality of the individuals are so varying that it would be very difficult to know whether, I mean, you could say this philosopher has done impressive things and it's thanks to his biological knowledge, but maybe it's just that he's a crazy good philosopher, you know. So I think we don't have the critical mass that could allow to do that. But I think Thomas Thomas and Maël, who have done this quantitative work, may have more rigorous view on this question. But I think it's we have a power issue.
And as you know, Lucy, we haven't worked on that question exactly, so it would be difficult to say. One thing we know is that it's perfectly possible to do very good biology, which is not experimental, but this is a very different question. This is something, different in terms of what kind of contributions are possible, but we haven't addressed empirically the question that you talked about today. Scott is next.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the introduction. I'm going to ask about broadening that domain. So, Lucy, I really appreciate you making me think in different ways. That's what philosophers help biologists like me do. But I don't necessarily work in lab or bench biology very much. What about, well, what would you think about the reaction of philosophers of biology who are interested in, say, broader scale meta-analyses, conservation biology, clinical psychology involving, large groups of people, or statistical analysis of clinical results? I mean, all of those areas of biology are seemingly to me begging for collaborative research that will say, how do you define your problems? What are the questions? How do you source answers to questions in which a validating experiment is not possible, either for ethical reasons or because you can't repeat history, like in paleontology or ecology? Um, so just wondering, now that Thomas has introduced it, would you get a different set of responses if you were to ask your question about philosophy in biology, not from the point of view of a laboratory or biologist, but from the point of what are these other points of view?
Yes, thanks a lot for this question. It's good that we have this discussion. So I would say two things. One is it's very possible that there are areas for which philosophy in biology is the biology is only theoretical, and therefore the quality of the philosophy in biology is only going to depend on the amount of theoretical knowledge, and experimentation is not a parameter that is interesting for those domains. This is the first part of the answer. The second part is I focused on experimental work. This is because it was easier for me to focus on that. But really, the point is hands-on, right? It's putting your hands in the dirt. That's what makes the difference. And there are many ways to put your hand in the dirt. Experiment is one way to do it, but statistical analysis is also a way to do it. Bioinformatic analysis is a way to do it. Mathematical modeling is a way to do it. Handling the data, having to put your hands on whatever the data is going to provide the kind of benefits that I have argued for. Is that also a good answer?
That's exactly my experience, particularly in the area of statistical manipulation or thinking about framing questions that can't be answered absolutely, but have a statistical component in best fit or goodness of fit of best results of comparing multiple models. There, from personal experience working with a mathematician philosopher, it's made a huge difference to me in thinking about those kinds of problems. So thanks, good answer.
A very quick follow-up on that, Lucie. If part of the question is to do philosophy of biology and philosophy in biology differently, what Scott just said will be very important, because the vast majority of work in philosophy of biology has been about non-empirical parts of biology. So that also explains the pattern that you see. And if we want to change that, that will also be a change of topics, which can perfectly be fine, but we should not do as if people could have done the kind of work they've done through empirical means, because this is not what they wanted to do, and this is not the topics or domains on which they work. So yeah, this is just, if we do this reorientation, it's going to also be a reorientation of scientific domains.
Yeah, agree.
Mila.
Yes. Thank you very much for the very interesting session and discussion. I have a question similar to one asked earlier about biologists turning to philosophy or vice versa. My question is, how important do you think it is to somewhat simultaneously employ philosophical or theoretical and empirical methods? Or would it also work to first do an empirical study and then philosophically reflect on it? Or do you think these methods really should go hand in hand and be employed somewhat at the same time?
Thanks for the question. So first, I would say I don't know. But if I have to try to provide an answer, I would say I I think those goes together. So if you think of biology, it's really integrated, the theoretical part and the experimental part. And every time you try to separate them, I think you risk to be in a mess because there is no experimental work that doesn't rely on some theoretical background and needs theoretical background for analysis. So you could try to have the philosophy first, then the experiment, and the philosophy again. But I think really what would be the most efficient is that they work hand to hand because experimental work requires this, but also because my feeling about philosophy is that this level of abstraction, it's really cool. That's something really good that we can provide, but it's also it comes with some risk, and sometimes it's too abstract, and every time and when you go back to reality, it's always more complicated, and then it's like, no, I don't know. So if you test in the meantime, then you can have a philosophy that is better adjusted to the reality of the scientific world. So I would argue this way, but really it's like maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Thank you.
Lucie, there is one question in the chat. Can you see it, or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, tell me, because I see a lot of things going on in the chat and I have not followed.
Yeah, okay. So I was wondering, what do you think is the difference and effects of publishing one's work in philosophy in biology, either in science journals or in philosophy journals?
The difference is absolutely major. So scientists, they just don't read philosophy journal. I mean, a few scientists, golden scientists, will read sometimes some philosophy journal, but most of them don't. So if you do philosophy of biology, maybe that's fine. If you do philosophy in biology and your aim is to contribute to science, then don't publish in philosophy journal. I mean, it's never going to make any contribution to science if scientists don't read what you do. It's like it's a very sociological problem. It's they won't read you, so it's work made for nothing. Again, if your goal is to make a scientific contribution. Also, this is the sociological aspect, but also there is a more I don't know how to say it, but the way you write for a science journal and the way you write for a philosophy journal is going to be different. The kind of review you will get is going to be different, and the reviewing process is going to make your product different. And the reviewing process in a scientific journal is sometimes very frustrating for philosophers, because you will have to remove some philosophical aspect that seems very important for the quality of your philosophical work. But it's actually useful because the end product is going to be a product that scientists can read and can adopt and then use. So if you want the percolation to be efficient, it's actually beneficial to go through this change of how you present the philosophical work that would be imposed by publishing in scientific journal. So it can be judged by philosophers as less good product, but it's going to be more efficient eventually for percolation again. It's all a matter of goal.
Lucie, I have a short question, and I see that we don't have much time. So my short question is, can you clarify whether your claim is that the quantity of empirical work will really matter, for what you described, or it's just like you must have done a little bit of empirical work to then know something. So is there really like a relation in terms of quantity? And also I was wondering about quality. As you know, I've been always not impressed by the empirical work done by philosophers, which is perfectly normal. So the very few people who have done it often do empirical work, which every experimentalist is like, yeah, it's just okay. But maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's just like, as you were saying before, maybe just doing a little bit of it will be enough to get the benefits that you were talking about. So can you clarify this, the quantity and quality aspects?
Yes, so the quantity, I really think it's not decisive. It's more like doing some of it, and I think it's doing some of it for each of your project, like a little bit of hands-on work for each of your project is going to make a difference, a high difference in the quality of your philosophical work. That's for the quantity. For the quality, I agree with you. Again, I kind of said it in the slides. It requires an expertise that we don't have. So for most of the benefits, it doesn't matter at all because the benefit is not from, it doesn't come from the result of the experiments really, but from doing it. But in some cases, it's the result that matter. And in those cases, collaboration is really, really important and decisive, I would say. So thanks for the question, yes.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. We're out of time, so I think it's probably good to stop here and really thank Lucie again. Let me try to clap again if I can. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Lucie. As I said before, our next seminar will be on April 21st with Ken Kendler, so you're all welcome to participate. It will be virtual. Thank you so much, Lucie, and see you soon.
Yep, thanks a lot.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.